Okay, excellent. So what we're going to be using is the fashion marketing textbook. If you don't have it, like I said, don't worry, I'll share it with you. Okay. So the fashion marketing textbook is by Heinz and Bruce. Okay. Let me try and share that with you. 1 second. Can you see this page? Are you there? Can you
Yes,
see this page? Fantastic.
yes.
The problem with this textbook is the models in this
Yeah.
textbook are very useful, but the textbook itself is outdated. Okay. This textbook is from 2007. So the problem is that the models are very relevant and the models are very useful, but the data, like the data they use for sales figures and averages and all those things, that data is outdated. So whenever we have to refer to data, we have to refer to updated data. And that is the first lesson for you for this course, is that when you refer to any data or any trends or any sort of research, it has to be recent and relevant. Do not use the data in this book. Like you will see that maybe they have a table where they compare Zara sales to H&M sales or whatever, but it's outdated. So you can't use that to establish to substantiate your arguments. Is that understood?
Yeah.
My recommendation to you is to go and read, to prepare chapter one, not chapter two, not chapter three, chapter one, chapter four, and chapter six and seven. One, four, six, and seven. Does that make sense? Okay.
Cool.
So your job is to read chapter one, four, six, and seven. And your job, okay, let me just switch off sharing, just seeing yourselves. Okay, so what is the subject all about? So, it's about fashion business studies. So the idea is not entrepreneurship. The idea is not to have you walk out of here and go and start your own fashion business. Okay, it's very much the theoretical side of fashion business, where we're looking at fashion business strategy, supply chain management, brand retail management, all these kinds of elements. And looking at it very much from the business studies side of it. So theoretically, how it works and how it is applied. The reason that you learn this in your honors is to give you a background of the wider picture of the environment in which fashion operates. Okay, it's not like I said, it's not entrepreneurial thing. So we're not going to go through the 20 steps of starting your own fashion business. This is not what this is. Does that make sense to you guys? So this is very much approaching it from a theoretical perspective. Also, the reason because of this is because when fashion honor students do their research, a lot of them like to do the research very much in a conceptual space where they might do a write up on the conceptualization of the newest line, the newest Gucci line according to this cultural lens. You know, very much a cultural lens. But some people also decide to do their research very much based on the real world, based on application in business contexts. Remember, the idea is for students to go and intern at a business. And through this research, they are able to contribute to the body of work, to the body of knowledge, but from a business perspective. Does that make sense? So that is why this approach is taken. It's taken to give you sort of a broad overview of all the elements that are considered in business strategy. What's the difference between business strategy? Business strategy, we're talking about people who have to answer the bigger sort of the headline questions about where we are moving as a fashion industry. And when I say we, I'm meaning a global fashion industry, obviously consisting of several smaller sort of subsectors and different smaller industries. Does that make sense to you guys? So please go and read the subject guide. How many of you have read the subject guide? Okay, thank you, Annalise. So you guys, please, your homework also. So write that again on your notepad. Your homework again is to go read your subject guide. Go familiarize yourself. We're covering the first 5 weeks worth of work for this assessment, and we are going through those learning outcomes. So let's start at the beginning, and we have to firstly put down the context of globalization. So I'm going to share my screen with you again. So you see this, you should be seeing your homepage now, am I right? Okay, are you seeing the slide back in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, so Corey will be familiar with this. So I'll just familiarize yourself, my sort of approach with you as well. We don't just learn about knowledge just for knowledge's sake. We don't just say, okay, well, it is what it is, and so what? Everything we do at this level is towards solving problems. And in most of my lessons, I try to get your thinking around what is the problem that we're looking to solve? What are the questions that we are seeking to answer? And then the knowledge is sort of directed towards that end. Okay, it's pointless for me just to tell you to go and learn something. That's not what you're interested in. As a professional, as a senior professional, you're interested in solving problems. So my problem is this. I want you to argue for or against globalization as a positive or negative influence in South African fashion retail industry development. Okay, globalization and the impacts of globalization. Has that been a net profit for the South African fashion retail industries? Or do you think that has actually been a net deficit towards our development in terms of our own fashion retail industries? So I suggest you go watch this video, Crash Course on Globalization, by John Green. Obviously, it's very good. It's very sort of introductory, but he sort of hits on all the key points of what we are going to discuss and what you should also be discussing. Okay, so this first slide is fairly straightforward, but I want you to focus on a few things that are going to come up quite regularly when you do your reading. And that's about globalization as being homogeneous. What do I mean by that, homogeneous? So the theory is that, okay, so the theory is basically that with the advent of global mass communication and mass technology during the 60s, globalization has been around for ages, and we know this. In some format or the other, we're talking about the Silk Road, colonization, we're talking about different sort of trade routes being set up. Globalization has been around for ages. But let me just blur my background, please. Sorry about that, guys. It's a bit dark back there. Okay, but we're talking about a new phase of globalization that really came with the advancement of technology and communication. What does that mean? So capital can come in different forms. It can be financial capital, which you're talking about money, investment in shares. But capital can also be in terms of cultural capital. And that can be transferred. Just like goods can be transferred across nations, just like goods and capital can spread across nations, so culture can spread across nations. And the idea is that with the advent of these communication systems, the most dominant countries, which were the Western countries, and yeah, especially I want you to think of global Hollywood, they were able to mass communicate and sort of colonize other countries with ideas, with culture. And when we're talking about homogenous culture, we're not saying that Japanese is the same as South African, is the same as Indian or whatever, what have you. We're saying that there is a global consumerist culture where people can consume and share in consumption. We're saying that is the homogenous part of it is the consumption part of it. That is why you can have a Louis Vuitton in Japan, and you can have a Louis Vuitton in Cape Town, and you can have a Louis Vuitton in South America, in several countries. And that is because globally there is a language, there is a consumerist language. Okay, there is a culture of consumption. And that is one of the things that I want you to really keep in mind as you do this. Okay, so let's move on. That's going to be one of the core themes that's going to crop up quite constantly. Okay, moving on. So you can go read the bullet points, but I also want you to just sort of They're broken up. So I don't have time to teach you through all of this. So I'm just going to give you sort of the headlines. Does that make sense? Okay, next up. Sorry. Okay, so when we talk about the definitions, it's always good to include a definition. Then we go on to the World Trade, this system, the World Trade Organization. So you just obviously have to go and watch this video. Your assignment will not ask you to delve into this part of it in terms of the global institutions. Okay, things like the World Trade Organization and the sort of different the GATT, the GATT, the MFA, multi-fiber arrangement. It's a nice to know, and you should know, and you should go watch the video, and you should go read up on it. But it's not going to be that important for your assignment, okay? But it's good for you to know this because you have to draw a timeline where the world's economies became liberated. So what do we mean by this? Okay. Guys, in a nutshell. So after World War II, economies were devastated. Although, especially the Western economies were devastated as a result of war. During that time, the colonies had already started becoming very good and very adept at producing goods for the homelands. Does that make sense to you? So remember, what do we get from when we established colonization? And not we, but pardon the language. So we're going to use a bit of triggering language here, guys. So just bear with me. When colonies and territories were established, those colonies were turned into sources of cheap labor and cheap materials to be used in service of production of goods. Does that make sense? The problem is that these territories became super adept at producing goods at low cost and importing those goods back into markets in the homelands. The problem is that after World War II, those industries needed to return back to the countries of origin. Does that make sense to you? Those economies needed to be protected and they needed to be rebuilt. So things like the GATT was established to make sure that these countries are protected from these goods, because the problem is that if goods are cheap, this is an economic principle. If goods are cheap, people will want them to be imported and they will want to pay less than if they're produced locally. However, they have to be produced locally to stimulate local economies. So during this time, there was a great deal of protectionism. Does that make sense? Up to 1997, it was all about, actually earlier than that. Like if we go back to, let me just close here. So if we talk about Bretton Woods, the establishment of Bretton Woods, we're talking about the establishment of these big sort of organizations like World Trade Organization, like the multi-fiber arrangement system, like the even now the World Health Organization. We call these Bretton Woods organizations because they're sort of like global contracts to arrange global relationships. Okay, so through these arrangements, quotas are put in place and limitations on trade are put in place between countries. As of 1995, these quotas fall away and economies become liberated. What does that mean? It becomes deregulated. It means quotas fall away and all of a sudden economic flows are open and countries can do proper trading again. Does that make sense to you guys? So again, all of a sudden, these countries, especially European countries, post-World War II, were disrupted. They had to introduce protectionism to protect and grow and stimulate their own economies. This lasted for about 40 years. And then this was removed and trade was regulated again. Basically, what this means for globalization is that we've actually only been seeing that's not even a word, but I want you to think of it as a new phase of globalization, which is really super globalization, because not only is it the deregulation of trade, we call it the liberalization, liberal meaning free, the freedom of trade and the freedom of global trade, and the increase in technology, the development of technology, the improvement of communication and transport. All of a sudden, all these elements make the perfect storm for development of new global world order. Okay, does that make sense to you guys? That's all you need to know from that section. You should go and read it and watch the video for your own interest's sake. But again, it's not so important for the actual assessment. I want you to move you on to this slide, because this is actually going to be what drives the introduction for your assignment. It even says in your introduction, discuss the drivers of globalization. There we speak about cultural homogenization, and I've already discussed that with you guys. Again, when we talk about culture homogenization, I'm not saying that cultures are the same. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm saying that there's a global marketplace for products. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's a global marketplace for products, and you can create markets. You can, McDonald's can have the same sort of values and be the same business, but it can have markets all over the world. Economies of scale and scope, and we'll discuss that shortly. Technological developments. Okay, let's get a bit of feedback from you guys. When I say technological developments, what do you guys think in your mind? What does that mean to you? What do you think are the technological developments that have been the most sort of pertinent over the last 20 years?
Communication and travel.
Okay, so that's perfect. So, Pia, that's absolutely 100%. So when we talk about communication for the fashion industries, I want to say to you, like, think of a scenario in the 80s where a business deal is done by a fax and telephone. Okay, I need to order this amount of goods from my Chinese supplier. Firstly, I have to speak to my Chinese supplier. He doesn't understand a word of English because education has not developed to that stage. We have to wait for a fax. We have to make a telephone call, and then information has to be sent via these means. Now, all of a sudden, we have integrated telephony. We have integrated IT systems. You can place an order, and that order is instant. It's instantly recognized on someone else's system. We see the introductions of things like points of sale, electronic points of sale, EPOS, where a sale is registered immediately at the point of sale. That data is consolidated at the end of the day and almost immediately made available to the supplier and the distribution hub. Think of these products and process innovations. When we get to chapter 6, which is supply chain, we'll look at this in depth. But for now, I want you to look at things like distribution channels. How has that changed? All of a sudden, roads have developed, airlines, airline transport, warehousing. All of these have been sort of just a huge, how can I put this? Just a tremendous development of technology all at the same time, but not just around marketing, also around manufacturing and the supply chain. Okay, so while I'm not going to expect you to know the smallest ins and outs of this, the technological developments, a lot of people always say, oh, social media and AI or whatever, without actually thinking about it. I don't even actually need you to go that far. I literally just need you to think about something like point of sale, electronic point of sale data, and how that data is instantaneous, and how that data is instantaneously made available to manufacturers and suppliers. Then deregulation, it's very sort of self-explanatory. Every time you import something or export something, there are tariffs. And for that, you're going to need to watch the video on, there is a video in the slide pack on what that does for in terms of protectionism and introducing ease of trade. Okay, so please watch that video also in the slide, and then strong international competitors. So here is the deal. With globalization, it's the larger companies who profit, and that is the problem. It's larger companies, and this also joins with the economies of scale and scope discussion. So this is quite simple. This is quite a simple principle. If a company has access to more customers, it grows faster. It becomes more powerful. It can invest more money into development of its supply chain. It has more leverage with supplier negotiations in terms of getting the best quality supplies at the best price and at the right time. It has the choosing rights of getting the best employees. Does that make sense? Getting the best educated employees from around the world. It makes more mistakes quicker, so it can learn quicker. Think about it. A small company, a small organization, when it makes a mistake, that mistake could actually be so costly that it actually wipes out the company. But larger companies can learn quicker because their systems are robust. Their systems are designed to handle making mistakes. And when I say something like making a mistake, I'm literally mean something like getting an order wrong, or doing a purchase order incorrectly, or misreading a forecast, or things like that. They can learn quicker and they can make more mistakes based on their size. So the rise of globalization is the rise of international global retailers, and then also the rise of international competition. And that's what this assessment is truly about. If you go and read the brief again, I'm asking you to compare a local retailer with a global retailer that is similar. I'm asking you to say whether globalization is a net profit or net deficit for competition. And I'm also saying to you, how can local retailers compete with global retailers? How can a Mr. Price compete with an H&M? If an H&M is a global company with X amount of stores in X amount of countries, having developed all these supply chains and all these sort of strong supplier connections. And trust me, guys, we'll talk about all of this. Okay, I know it sounds a bit alien to you now. I know it sounds like we're going a bit arse backwards, but trust me, we're establishing the big context first, and then we'll drill down into the smaller mechanics. Okay, but these, if you're going to read anything, this is what you need to go and read first and foremost, is the drivers of globalization. Then we, of course, have the argument supporting free trade. The best argument supporting free trade is quite simple. It's comparative advantage. So it should, economically, it should work out. Because if I, as a country, I'm forced to produce the best at what I'm good at. I am Brazil, and I have natural resources, which is coffee beans. I have a whole boatload of unskilled labor, so I can pluck those coffee beans. I can transform them into something else, and I can export them. I'm actually being economically efficient because that is what I'm good at. Another country is very good with producing wheat. Another country is very good at producing maize. And another country is very good at producing, Italy is very good at producing clothes and producing garments because they've got those traditions. They've developed that sort of that intellectual capital over hundreds of years. So yes, we can get leather from Spain, and we can send that leather to Italy. And Italy will just literally make the best product because that's the comparative advantage. So that's the economic rule. And the economic rule is also that when we open ourselves up to competition, I understand that you can get crushed under the competition, but you can also, you also at the same time opening yourself up to wider markets. Okay, so the idea is that sort of on every sort of logical trajectory as a business, if you're growing, you want to grow into a sort of regional and then into a global aspect. Okay, if you really want to look at a consumer market. Now that we've spoken about liberalization, how many of you can tell me the difference between oligopolies and monopolies? Let's throw that out. Don't shake your head because we did this in class. In fact, now I'm going to ask you specifically.
I wasn't in the first class, remember?
Okay, guys, so I'm not going to pick on Karu. We know in South Africa, pleasure. In South Africa, we have monopolies and oligopolies. Okay, you have let's use a really silly example. Okay, let's say Edcon was the only supplier of clothes in South Africa. Close your eyes for a moment and suppose yourself Edcon has a monopoly on clothes. What does that mean for competition? And what does that mean for economic efficiency? As simple as you have with a Telkom or with an Eskom, with any monopoly, it's considered inefficient because there is no pressure on that monopoly to improve. It's sort of not a natural, according to free market principles. So do we have any communists in the room or any socialists in the room? Okay, so obviously you can go read that in your own time, but we're approaching this very much from a very free market approach where we're saying that a free market principle means that a monopoly and an oligopoly is inefficient. There is no incentive for you to develop. There's no incentive for you to innovate because you've captured the market. Does that make sense? Same is for any industry, not just industry where we're talking about like big sort of natural resource issues. We're talking about any industry where there's a monopoly. It's unhealthy because innovation stagnates. So what happens? We have Edcon, we have TFG in South Africa, and they're going along, minding their own business, developing producing clothes, whatever. And all of a sudden, globalization happens. What needs to happen? They need to upgrade their systems. They need to source better resources. They need to find better supply chain networks. They cannot afford to charge a customer 300 Rand for a t-shirt because this global supplier has just came in and they've got a better t-shirt at 150 Rand. So efficiency needs to be ramped up for everyone. Does that make sense? And that is one of the things where people say, okay, well, globalization, that's actually one of the this is the supporting argument for free trade. Competition, why is competition good? Well, it's the economic principle. Competition is good because it lowers prices, it improves productivity, and it improves customer service. If you have to compete for a customer, obviously you need to compete on these things. Prices, productivity, obviously to make your own margins, and you have to improve your customer service. So keep that in mind when you're doing your comparison of retailers. Okay. Scale economies. Quite simply, if you were Edcon and TFG, you were just dealing with maybe Namibia and South Africa. All of a sudden, you can have businesses in Australia and the UK. Same with Zara, same with H&M. All of a sudden, the world is your market. And that means that you can exploit the economies of scale. Can anybody tell me what's the economic principle around economies of scale? How many of you did economics in high school? Okay, anybody want to hazard a guess?
Stefan, sorry, can we just take a step back? What is economies of scale?
Okay, so economies of scale is the economic principle of volume. Price per volume. So write on your piece of paper, price, X, volume. Okay, the idea is that the more you produce of something and it's standardized, the cheaper it becomes to produce that unit per unit. Does that make sense? The better you become at producing something and the more volumes you can achieve, the cheaper it becomes to produce that thing per unit. So a simple example, you set up a prototype. To produce a prototype is very expensive because you have to set up your machine, You have to train your laborer or your technician. You have to do prints. You have to maybe do a register an IP or whatever. To set up that prototype is expensive. Now you have to produce 100 units of those things, okay? But you haven't yet made mistakes. You haven't yet had time to sort out all the little tiny mistakes and errors, okay? So in those 100 units, it's still pretty expensive because you have picked up 10 mistakes. And those mistakes cost you, and it costs money to sort out those mistakes. But now you've sorted out those mistakes, and in the next 1,000 units, there's only 5 mistakes. Does that make sense? There's only 5 errors because you've already sorted out the errors. So you're ramping up the volumes, but it's becoming increasingly efficient to produce those volumes. Does that make sense to you guys? And you do that with anything. You do that with factories. You do that with processes. This is the economic principle. It's simply cheaper to produce 1,000 of a thing than 10 of a thing. Okay, and that's all you need to know with economies of scale. You want to achieve economies of scale because firstly, what do we say? You've got now a huge global market and you're catering to a huge global market. So you have to achieve economies of scale anyway. But how you achieve those economies of scale is simply by broadening out what your company is capable of doing. That's why we always have to say, when you do consider bigger markets, you have to expand. You have to expand your business, both maybe vertically, maybe broadly. What do we mean by vertically? Vertically means you have to incorporate more systems into your business from production right through to distribution, or horizontally, you need to maybe buy other companies that can do those things inside of your company. Okay, but we'll get there later. For now, just know that economies of scale is what globalization is all about. That's why only a certain number of companies can scale. And that's yeah, hi little one. When they scale, that's also when we say, well, they need to go public. Because when you get investment from a wider public, you're talking about being able to get higher market caps on investment. Does that make sense to you guys? That's why we say a lot of times when you say we're going global, it also means we are listing on the JSE or the London Stock Exchange or wherever, because we literally have to fund this mega sort of gearing of the economies of scale. Does that make sense to you guys? So most little companies, they start off small, they have to make the errors, they have to sort out all the inefficiency in their production and manufacturing. And as they sort out those inefficiencies, they can ramp up volume. And with that volume, it costs less per unit to produce per unit. Okay, I'm not going to ask you any economic question about this, but you do need to understand the principle of that. You do need to understand that you cannot compare someone like an H&M who can produce quantities across 55 different markets to a Mr. Price who produces quantities for 2 markets. Does that make sense? They cannot afford to leverage their systems to that extent. Some industries cannot grow without access to other markets. And this does not apply to all industries. It's not all industries can scale to that size. So you'll hear people always talk about scaling their business. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about how do you scale your business? How do you scale a fashion business? So in chapter 3, we're going to talk about the different, not chapter 3, but in lesson 3, you'll see that we talk about Ansof's growth matrix. And there are different ways to grow your business. One of the key ones is market development. Okay, that's scaling. So you have to scale for more customers. So what you either sell more to the same customers or you find new customers. But one way or the other, you have to scale your business. Does that make sense? So let's quickly do a little mind exercise with that. Mr. Price wants to expand to other markets. It's burnt its fingers in Chile. As you know, it recently returned from Chile with its tail between its legs. Now we're saying to you, okay, but now it wants to expand into Africa. What would need to happen with that business to be able to expand into Africa in terms of economies of scale? Well, think about it. It has to learn about that market, doesn't it? So it has to sort out those inefficiencies. There's going to be market inefficiencies because it's going to have a hard time forecasting. It has a hard time forecasting for a local market. Now I'm telling you, okay, forecast for Nigeria. Okay, right, fair enough. Then I'm going to say to you, okay, you have to figure out how to get your product to Nigeria. What inefficiencies does it have to sort out there? Transport inefficiencies, tariff inefficiencies, regulation inefficiencies. We know that there's lots of sort of bureaucratic red tape in terms of doing business with certain countries. All those inefficiencies will add to its initial setup fees and its initial capital investment. What about its communication? What about setting up communication in that country? What about setting up a team in that country to facilitate business in that country? All of these elements are what we're talking about. Is it able to scale to a size that is twice its own size? Because remember, again now, South Africa, maybe Mr. Price has about, let's be very generous and say Mr. Price has 5 million regular customers in South Africa. Nigeria has what? 1 billion people. What is Nigeria's population at this moment? 800 million people? Am I right? It's getting up there, 500 million people. So what does that say about your economies of scale? What is the economies of scale it needs to achieve to be able to operate in that market? Does that make sense to be profitable? Okay. I'm scared that we lost Christine. Do you think she's coming back though?
What's up here on WhatsApp?
Can someone send her a message for me quickly?
I will do that.
This is all recorded, so she'll obviously be able to get this. Okay, traditional factors, and I need to speed up a bit, guys. So a lot of this is going to be for self-study. This also one of the key things I want you to remember. And this, so you've already learned about the economic principle of economies of scale, but we also have to talk about the factors of production. Any economist, let me just see you guys again. So any economist will tell you about the factors of production. And they are, oh, there we go. So Christina, you can just listen. Just give me a second. So when we talk about, we spoke about comparative advantage, guys. Again, let's go back to those countries. And the best example will always be Brazil has coffee. Brazil has cacao beans or whatever you want to call it, okay? Some countries have a large amount of L, labor. Some countries have a large amount of K, capital. Some countries have a large amount of L, territory. This is the Samuelson and Jones model. And what this model says is that if T or K increases, your output should increase. So T is territory and K is capital. With capital, and you cannot increase land. Does that make sense to you guys? You cannot increase land. Your land is finite, but what you can increase is capital, and what you can increase is labor. The problem with land is that it's not mobile. So you cannot take Brazil's ecology and move it to another country. Does that make sense? Our agriculture is pretty much set in place. Okay, let me ask you, why is agriculture important to the fashion industries? Hello, little one. What about agriculture or material production is important to the fashion economies? Cotton? Yes. We use wool. Wool comes from sheep. A sheep need land to graze. Okay. What about leather? Where does leather come from?
Animal.
Cattle. What do you need what do you need for them? Grazing.
Space.
You need territory, you need space. Okay. So agriculture is a factor of production. And now it's a global factor of production. You guys need to start thinking in terms of globally. What are the global spots of factor production? When I say to you, okay, well, China has a lot of the factor we call L, labor. And because of its ability to copy technology, it has a lot of K, capital, right? But what does it not have?
Territory.
Territory, exactly. It needs to get its materials that it produces from other countries. Okay, Europe. What does Europe have? It maybe has some. It has some territory, but do you think it has a territory to be able to produce for mass markets globally? I agree with you, Annelies. So the argument is that the intellectual capital, which is to say how industries have developed skills, still remains in the global north, okay? Or what we like to call also the triad. The triad is United States, Europe, and Japan. That is also what we call the global north. And the idea is that the global north retains much of the intellectual capital and the financial capital. It is not for no reason that London is seen as the financial capital of the world, okay? But then we have what we call the global south. And what does the global south have? It has agriculture, ideally, and it has labor, okay? So the idea is that China has sort of crossed that divide, because not only does it have the cheap labor, but it has also started to invest in capital. And when I say capital, I mean intellectual capital, either by stealing it, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, guys. I'm serious. It was literally taken, okay, through sort of literally by copying. I wouldn't say spycraft, because there's obviously no evidence of that, but literally by taking a product and saying, okay, we will now go and produce that product. You will do that. You will produce this product day in and day out until it looks like that product. End of story. Okay, so to get back to this economic principle. So the reason why we have to talk about this is because when we talk about globalization, you have to know the territory that you're talking about. What is it known for? What is it known for having? What factors of production does it have available to it to be able to produce? So it's quite easy saying to South Africa, okay, well, obviously we need to start just producing factories. We just need to start industrializing. We just need to start like creating our own industries. But what is the problem with that? Realistically speaking, what is the issue about those factors of production? What needs to happen before we can increase that factor of production? Okay, if you want to talk about something like, say that again.
Capital.
Exactly. So we're talking about that's why people always go crazy about but we don't need international investment. The kind of international investment that's happening now is known as very sort of short-term investment. It's people trading on derivatives from currency exchange. It's people going, our money will be relatively safe in the rand because the rand is stable, and the Reserve Bank has a pretty strong hold over the rand. But that's not the kind of investment that we're looking for, which is investment into companies, investment into industries, investment into infrastructure. Does that make sense? Those things are long term. If you're saying, well, we're going to start making factories like the car producers, that's why everybody goes crazy when BMW says we're opening a factory in the Eastern Cape, because it implies that it's going to be a long-term investment. It's going to increase in capital, our local capital. We are going to learn how to produce motor vehicles. Is that perfectly understandable? So the idea is that that sort of capital investment needs to happen. What about intellectual capital? What about things like education and industrialized knowledge? If we don't develop those skills, and here's the problem, we're gonna get to that later. But for now, this is going to become very important when we talk about macroeconomic issues. So when you look at your assignment, you'll see that the very last section of your assignment, the conclusion, we're talking about macroeconomics. This speaks to the macroeconomics of it, of what happens in terms of what production factors we have available when we do our work. Okay, so you're going to have to go and read this. It's not important so much to understand the economic side of it, but when I ask you to talk to me about the factors of production, you need to talk to me about the factors of production, okay, and what that means. Why is this model a bit outdated? Because there's a lot of things that have changed in the meantime. So remember, we said that, okay, well, if you have territory, you use that as your factor of production, okay, or labor. And it assumes that as your output will rise, your wages for your labor will also rise. And that was one of the economic model's assumptions. It's saying that it's good that you can have labor can increase the whole time because then wages will increase. So we can have a labor-intensive country like South Africa, and it's okay that they can be labor-intensive because as labor increases, wages will also increase. It will increase proportionally, right? More labor equals more money equals more wages, right? Per capita. The problem with that assumption is that labor has become skilled. Okay, labor has become skilled. So in a way, labor reaches its ceiling where machinery and technology takes over the work of labor. Okay, and those economists of the 60s and the 50s didn't take into account how technology will just I heard a cow in the background. It also did not consider that's cute. It also did not consider internationalization and globalization. Does that make sense? Economists did not take into account that labor is very mobile and will move to where it's needed. Okay, it was assumed that labor would stay in one place and it's immobile. Technology has changed everything. So of course, imitation means that advantages have been challenges, and that's the China Western conundrum, is that the technology is not, it's imitatable. Does that make sense? Any competitive advantage that you acquire from technology, it's not there forever. And I think the best example you can use here is Apple and Samsung. Okay, with both of the companies accusing each other of, especially Apple towards Samsung, and actually winning some court cases where they're saying, well, basically you're using our proprietary knowledge and you're implementing it into our phones. And Samsung is saying, we'll gladly pay those fines because we're winning the battle in the market. Does that make sense? Ultimately, they don't mind paying those fines because ultimately it's about capturing the market. That's the most important. Which brings us also to other factors like brand and culture management, styles and of strategies. And that also comes down to things like, okay, well, you can manage these factors of production with strategic management. And remember, strategic management developed to be global as globalization developed. It's not like in the 50s and 60s, people are going, oh, we're thinking about our Japanese office or we're thinking about our Asian markets. Does that make sense? They were thinking about their local markets. They were strategically planning for their local markets. But as globalization occurs, executives start to think about how they will employ different labor factors of production across different supply chains. So if I'm Zara and I am in Spain, Inditex, and I'm in Spain, what factors of production will I use around me that suits my business strategy? And then for what will I go to for Bangladesh? And for what will I go to for Afghanistan? Does that make sense? Where will I strategically source my factors of production? And economists could not predict that. They could not really predict that sort of sophisticated, complex system because, again, we don't think they took into account the other aspects of globalization, which is the development of technology and communication networks. And then finally, there are also mobility barriers. So when I want you to do your analysis of the two companies, what is a barrier, an entry and exit barrier for another company doing business here and for one of our fashion retailers doing business in another country? What are some of the barriers? Okay. Porter's diamond. I'm just quickly going to talk you through this because we're running out of time. So again, you use Porter's diamond when you want to ask a question. Is a company ready to expand into an international market? Okay. It asks about factor conditions. So again, factor conditions meaning things like labor. Can we produce materials? What is the labor situation? Can it be produced? Are the necessary skills available? Then we ask questions like demand conditions. What is the market like? We can have a market here we can have a market that really wants Hermes goods and services. Or we can actually have the factor conditions. But do we have a market that demands that kind of product? What about the firm's strategy, structure, and rivalry? So this is a bit more complex. This asks about the competition. And here I want to tell you something, that why competition is also a good thing. So let's quickly do another. Have I stopped sharing? Can you see my face? Let's quickly do another mind experiment. If there's a new product, how do you guys feel about adopting a new product? Do you generally feel confident or do you feel scared of adopting a new product?
It depends on the type. It depends on the type of product.
Okay.
So, for example, if it's tech, then I sort of do a little bit of research before I just adopt it. So, like before we switched from BlackBerry to iPhone or whatever, it's quite a lot of.
So let's stick with tech. I'm saying to you that there's a pill that is produced from stem cell technology that is going to remove all your wrinkles. If you take that pill, for 3 months daily,
I'll take it.
You'll take it.
Yeah.
Okay, but that pill, it's stated that the pill has passed clinical trials, but there's only one company doing that pill. And when you do research on that company, it's like a Chinese company. How is your confidence? You're not so keen anymore. What if there are two American companies, a European company, and a Chinese company who all produce these pills? How do you feel now all of a sudden?
More confident.
Why?
Better research. Is the better research?
Excellent. Fantastic. So you can see that an industry has been built. An industry is building around it. Does that make sense? So you understand that from the structure of an industry, you understand if something is good or not good, or if something is valid and tangible for that market. Okay, I am not going to create an Uber in a country with no roads. That's even a better example. Does that make sense? And that's where we talk about things like the firm strategy, structure of the industry, and rivalry, because it makes sense to place your business or to grow your business among competitors. It means that there is ground for that product or that market to exist. And finally, related and supporting industries. Again, let's go back. Maybe the pull example was a bit far-fetched, but let's then stick to the Uber example. You don't just need roads, you also need cars, right? That's related, supporting industries. You need tech, you need Wi-Fi, there needs to be cell phones, smartphones, whatever. You need a support structure around those industries to exist. So basically, companies coming to this country, like your H&M, like your Zara, they would have had to have asked these questions before they came here. Does that make sense to you guys? What factor conditions did Zara ask? Okay, you know, it's not like we need labor because all our supply chains are in place. We're producing everything here, either in Europe, or we some of the other stuff we're outsourcing to Turkey, and some of our basic items we're getting from Afghanistan. It's all coming through to the hub here in Spain, and then it's being distributed around the world. So factor conditions we are happy with, and we have the exchange rate is not that bad, where we can still produce and still sell and get a return on a return on sales on South Africa, despite the exchange rate. Okay, what about the demand conditions? Okay, well, you look at South Africa and you go, oh well, it's a growing, emerging black middle class, growing very strong. Consumerism is strong in that country. They've got access to global telecommunications. They've got infrastructure, so obviously they're developing a consumerist, homogenous culture. So they'll like consuming our products. So there's definitely a demand there. What about firm strategy? Oh, they've got the big four there, but they're not that strong. You know, they're focusing very much on keeping inventory. They're not fashion forward. They can't actually, you know, we'll actually be good rivals for them. Does that make sense? And then related and supporting industries. Yes, they've got good infrastructure, and they've got fashion. They've got fashion weeks. You know, there is a fashion industry in South Africa, so they'll understand what we're all about, and we'll be able to operate. Does that make sense to you guys? That's the questions that they need to answer before they can expand to a different territory. So you can go do the Benetton case by yourself. And the final question is, what are the implications for South African firms seeking to go global? So you, for your own mind experiment, take our local firms and do this. Okay, what would our local firm do to achieve success in Nigeria? Okay, we don't have time, so we're not gonna do that mind experiment now. But just go and just do it for yourself. You know what I'm saying? Ask the questions about factors, and you know the economic factors. Ask the questions about demand. Is there a demand? And demand is always about markets. It's always about, is there a market for our product? What's the fashion industry like in Nigeria? What fashion retailers exist in Nigeria? What's their market coverage? What are some of the gaps in that market? Obviously, that's not homework, so just relax. That's obviously just for you guys to have fun with. Okay, this you can read by yourself. The winners and losers of free trade and protectionism. So globalization is currently sort of in the midst of a debate about free trade and protectionism, where people are starting to go, well, there are definite winners and losers from globalization. And the fact of the matter is South Africa could possibly be an example of this. And that's what you also need to go and research, because that's going to be important for the last bit of your assignment. What has been the impact of Chinese imports on our local manufacturing and our local fashion retail industries? Go and Google that and go and read a few articles about that. Also, here's another thing. When I say Google, I'm going to say the same thing to you that I say to all my other students. Guys, basic Google searches are out. Okay, I expect you to use ProQuest searches for academic journals. I expect you to use news articles and annual reports for if you want relevant, up-to-date, cutting-edge information. And if you want more information on models and how the models have been implemented, use academic journals and articles. Okay, I can spot a Google blog a mile away, just like you guys can, because you're all educators. And if I see that, I'm going completely crazy, to use a family-friendly word in this case. Okay, so your protectionism is basically frowned upon in our global world. Okay, let me just, why is that? Okay, well, globalization has two views. Maybe you can tell me what your view is. There's a normative view, which is highly idealistic, and there is a realist view, which is highly cynical. And it's not just to do with cultural, it's also to do with economics, culture, politics, and what's it? It's basically the argument of, if I'm a globalist and I'm saying, ideally speaking, globalization is good. Liberalization is good. We want to work with organizations like the WHO, the World Trade Organization. The IMF is not a bad guy, and we are open to the world. The second view is realist, and we're saying no. Well, we have to be realistic about it. We have to protect ourselves as a nation. We see ourselves as a nation, and we have to negotiate our place with other nations. It's not so much dealing with other organizations. It's about protecting our society. And the best example of that, as you have read from the headlines today, is the Trump WHO dichotomy. Who can tell me what that dichotomy is all about? Are you guys following politics? Do you guys like politics? Okay. Remember, politics is economics, guys. So Trump represents the Brexit movement. It represents countries moving towards protectionism. Quite simple, moving towards protectionism. The UK people are saying, we will not be doing business through the European Union as our proxy. We will be doing business on our own behalf and making our own deals. We do not want to deal with organizations like the EU. We do not want to deal with organizations that are sort of supposed to create rules for our relationships. The core relationship for us is our sovereignty. Okay, so it's very much the US and the UK. And then there's the globalization effect, saying, okay, guys, but let's be realistic. We make friends with China, we make friends with this country, and we remove regulations. But what does that do to our economy? What's the impact of that on our economy? What has that done to our production and our manufacturing? It would maybe do us good to be protectionist, but it would be frowned upon to be protectionist, because being protectionist is seen as being cynical and negative, and not having a normative idealist view of globalization. So you four and Christine somewhere there in the background, would you be able to give a perspective on this? Would you be able to defend and argue yourself? And not politics, because we don't have to talk politics, but remember, politics is economics. And would you be able to defend a view of yourself as having supporting a normative view of globalization, or a realist view of globalization? Is that a difficult one to answer now? Can I leave that with you? Can I let it simmer with you for a while? Do I get a yes? Okay, yes. I'll let it simmer with you for a while. We'll take a break in about 15 minutes, okay?
Cool.
Tell me if I'm teaching, if I should actually just do highlights. Okay, so I'm trying to do highlights, guys, but it's like I feel like I don't want to leave you hanging. Okay, so that video you can watch by yourself. This is all very important. These are just the figures, okay? So let me just share this with you again because I just realized I'm not sharing with you. Do yourself a favor, go through these figures, and then just read how it's changed from 2004 to 2018, okay? Can you read these tables? Are you happy with this? So the only point of this is what I want to see in fashion business studies. So Karu, when you say to me that there has been tremendous growth of this in your assignment, I'm going to lay an egg and I'm going to lose my shit a little bit because you have not quantified it. You have not stated that based on these statistics saying that China has seen a 10% growth in exports. Now we're saying you're substantiating your ideas. Okay. How will you use this in your assignment? You will say that, okay, well, let's say you choose Mr. Price and you say, Mr. Price has seen a tremendous growth in sales. Quantify it. You say you can look at it, the annual report, and you can say that based on the annual report, sales indications are still strong for this retailer. Okay. That's why these things are here on this slide, just to show you, just to quantify it. So let me give you an example. This is from your textbook, okay? This is why I'm saying it's outdated, because how can you use these stats from 2007? It's outdated. Don't even use them, but they still tell a story because they're saying that the EU was a bigger exporter of clothing in 2004. Correct? Look at that. Exporters, EU, value $74.92 billion. China was second at $61.86 billion. Okay, let's fast forward, and that's clothing, okay? That's not textiles. What has happened? Okay, China has overtaken the EU in terms of apparel exporters. That's all. That's the only story that I'm showing you here. Okay, the EU is also an exporter of apparel. However, do you guys think that apparel is manufactured in the EU, or do you think that it's manufactured from in other places? That's another story you might need to tell. Okay, but don't worry too much about this. Okay, this is a nice little story about Chinese development over the 3 phases. I don't think I need to go too much into that. Again, we're just telling the story about how China actually grew to this point. Okay, we're talking about free trade in our own sort of environment and how it sort of developed. Back when we had our previous regime, it was obviously dominated by, yes, we had access to global markets. However, at a stage, because of the sanctions, and that's what they were, sanctions, we were cut off from free trade. And then we started to become almost by force a protectionist state. Okay, and that was the argument. What happened in 1994? Why did our economy go explode? And I don't mean explode in a bad way. I mean explode in a good way. Why did our economy explode? Because we were back on the international scene. We had access again to global markets, and global markets had access again to us. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, fantastic.
Can I ask a random question?
You can, of course.
With this whole COVID-19, there's so many articles about sort of like what's our industry going to do next, what is the effect on retailers, and of course we had in merchandise planning we had a discussion about globalization versus deglobalization, and a lot of the students mentioned sort of a forced deglobalization over the last month of not having access to any outsources. Do you think that I just want to phrase this correctly, but do you think that we might have to take a protectionist stance to sort of recover our economy, or would a globalized stance be better if we come out of this lockdown? Like, what would be a faster or better recovery?
So I'm of the opinion that we should have adopted a protectionist stance a while back. As far back as 2007, we should have adopted a protectionist stance because of the state of the global economy. We are one of those countries where we are one of the losers from globalization because we cannot necessarily compete with our limited resources. We made friends with the wrong people, which is like BRICS and China. But if you're making a friend with China, you're saying, okay, well, we're removing all regulations. What does China do? It's simply going to do what it does, and it's going to basically dump cheap Chinese goods on your shores. Okay, that might have been good for the first few years after the democratization of our country in terms of lifting the quality of lifestyle of millions and millions of people. Of course, maybe protectionist wasn't a good idea then. However, it needs to stop. So I do think that a forced deglobalization, in a sense, is a good thing. I don't want to say it's sophisticated on many different levels, but I want to say it's a good thing because the problem is for me is that these super nations, they act in a very predatory way. China, United States, they tend to act in a predatory way. And I think it's more of a thing of you need to make good deals with these countries. But the fact of the matter is that you have nothing to leverage with. Does that make sense? You have nothing to leverage with. You want to sell into the American market and even into the Chinese market because you've got millions and millions and millions of people who are there. But what is it that China benefits with partnering with you? You know what I'm saying? Why did China not say, okay, we're going to build factories here and we're going to develop your textile industry? No, they didn't do that. They just went, we're dumping our finished goods here. We see you as a consumer market. We're not seeing you as a partner. We're seeing you as a consumer market for our goods. And that's the problem. You know what I'm saying? So globalization is good because what do we start with? We started with comparative advantage. We said that economically, the economic principle is that you should develop what you're good at and you should trade with other countries and they should trade with you what they're good at. But we should go back to that, but in a state where we trade what is essential for the survival of our economy. Does that make sense?
That makes 100% sense. Do you think we could sort of, well, it's all hypothetical, right? But
I'm not an economist, and that's why also you need to go and read what an economist says.
No, I'm reading a lot, but I'd love your opinion about it. Do you think sort of we could I don't want to say impose new regulations, but relook the partnerships that we have? Do you think we could set up new boundaries and new systems after this pandemic? Or do you think we'll be held to our previous partnerships?
I'm thinking we will be held to our previous partnerships, but China works on the it's diplomacy. We have good diplomatic ties with these countries. So we can still retain our diplomatic ties, but we should focus all our attention on creating Africa regionalization, if you ask me. I don't understand why this. Here's the thing. China is looking at building infrastructure from the north to the south of Africa. Okay, they want to facilitate a line, a sort of a Silk Road for the new age, going through Africa. Okay, why is Africa not doing that? Why is Africa not responsible for developing the new Silk Road? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it's almost like Africa is outsourcing this to a foreign agent when it doesn't need to. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I'm saying not necessarily protectionist, but we have to start looking at where it makes sense to be regionally involved. And I think the problem is because some African countries are richer than other African countries. And I think that's the problem. South Africa is generally pretty rich, relatively speaking, and Nigeria is pretty rich, generally speaking. And in between, we've got a whole bunch of variables that are not necessarily conducive. So it's a lot of work to set up that sort of regionalization economy to work. Whereas China is just going, no, we'll just build it. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to do much. You know what I'm saying? We'll just build it and own it. And, you know, you'll get what you get out of the deal. So I do think that globalization needs to be, it sort of, again, it lost control. And now this is us having to stand back and say, okay, well, we have to start looking at what do we mean by what is free trade and our relationships with each other. Because I'm not saying we're following in the footsteps of the UK and the US, by no means, don't get me wrong, because that's very much, I think that's as much cultural as it is economic. But it really is an element of rationalizing globalization. There has to be a limit to how the predatory actions that these big super nations can take and the leverage they have over smaller nations. I think you should go read about it because it's not going to inform. I would say globalization is about 10, 20 out of 50. So that's about 40% of your paper. Okay, so it's worth your while to read up, to bone up on these elements. Okay, I think that's it for first lesson. How do you guys feel? Go watch the videos. So let me just share the screen again. What you want to do is you want to work. Is this now your class or no? This is not your class. Can you see my computer screen again?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what you want to do is you want to work through it systematically. There's the videos. As that slide pops open, watch the video. As you pop over to that slide, watch the video. As you pop over onto slide 32, watch the video. There's your reading, and that's it. That's the first slide. Easy, eh, guys? Okay, let's go back to the brief. And then just reread the brief. Can you see the brief in front of you?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Hi, how are you? Welcome back.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
It's breaking up on my laptop, so I'm on both now.
I'm sorry, I went on. I didn't stop, sorry, but this is all recorded, okay? So I'll upload the recording for you guys. So step 1, provide an introduction of the global fashion industry in the context of globalization by providing an overview of the key globalization drivers, and we've discussed the drivers, in the fashion industry with examples. Briefly outline the purpose of the analysis that follows the introduction. So again, just a quick brief introduction of globalization and why it's going to be important for the rest of your piece. 500 to 750 words, it's not a lot. Okay, I have to limit the word count because one of the skills of writing at this level is being economic with your words and using pretty words that tell you a whole story in one word. Okay. If I say to you the word exploitation, you can conjure up several different narratives using a word of exploitation in the context of globalization. Okay, you need to use words and you need to reduce your word count and you also need to edit yourself. This is a skill that you need. So yes, if you go over by 250 words, I'm not going to penalize you into next Thursday. Keep me interested, keep me fascinated, and I'll keep reading. However, I know when you're waffling. I know when you're just like talking, using platitudes and stretching out. And then I get bored and then I start penalizing for that word count. Okay, so will you be able to do the drivers easily enough? Okay, fantastic. Let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back. How does that sound? Shall I move quicker through slide back 2 and 3? Okay, so we can get up to 3 at the end of tonight. Okay, write down your notes so we can consult either via email basis or via Teams, whatever you prefer. Okay, whatever I want to happen tonight, the first thing that has to happen tonight is you have to walk out of here with 10% anxiety. Okay, a little bit of anxiety is good. Okay, trust me, a little bit of anxiety is good, but too much anxiety is not good. Okay, I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Hello. Okay, did you make your coffee? Cheers. Just waiting for no one. Let's go. Okay, so just a quick. Are you back? Okay, welcome back. Okay, just a quick reminder, you have no extra reading for lesson 1. Only watch the videos and read chapter 1 of your textbook. Understood? Excellent. Okay, now we're going to move on to chapter 2. And for this, you'll want to do the reading for chapter 4 in your textbook.
Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about international marketing and global retailing. And you can see the slide pack open in front of you, yes? Fantastic. Okay, as always, we start the section with a problem, and you can read that for yourself and just go and read those links. So let's, for a second, pretend that we're a brand that's coming to South Africa, and the first thing you want to do is identify the country. And obviously, the reason that we're doing this is for your assignment, because we're putting ourselves in the minds of a retailer that's doing business in a different part of the world, correct? And the first thing you want to do is screen the country. But before we get there, remember I spoke about your sort of business strategy. So these are the sort of strategies that are available to you, depending on what you want to do. First thing you want to do is you want to look, read the blocks on the left-hand side, because it corresponds to the matrix on the right-hand side. This is called the Ansoff matrix. Very popular model. It's not a theory, it's a model. And what you use this model to sort of determine what strategy a business is using to grow. Its growth strategies. So firstly, let's start at the upper left-hand corner, market penetration. It wants to deal in existing markets with existing products. So basically, this company wants to just sell more products to existing markets. So this means it has to either cut prices or spend more on advertising or make product improvements. The idea is that it needs to sell to the same markets, sell more or make more money from the same markets. Bottom left, new markets with existing products. So if I'm a company, I'm not going to change my product, but I want to develop a new market. That can be finding new markets. That could be geographical. It could be in terms of new target markets. It can be in terms of, yeah, that's actually the two main ones. Is it geographical or is it new target markets? Then at the top right-hand corner, I can have existing markets, but new products. So the best example of these, if H&M all of a sudden decides it wants to now, obviously we know that it's a company established in Holland, or I think, is it Holland? But now it's got branches all over the world, and it's got stores all over the world. It obviously decided on mostly a market development strategy where it wanted to develop new markets. If it's existing markets and new products, now let's use another example. Let's go back to Mr. Price. Mr. Price is South Africa, and it has developed a market in South Africa, South African consumers. But it wants to now start selling different products. Like now it's going into athleisure. You guys know what athleisure is? It's like athletic gear mixed with leisure, athleisure. For that, they had to adopt a product development strategy. So they had to do a bit of research and development, they had to do a bit of marketing. The basic idea is to get more money from existing customers using existing resources and existing distribution channels. It's no use you have to set up an entirely new business to develop new products, because that's defeating the point. What you would then do is the bottom right-hand side is diversification. That means you actually are buying a company and you're actually diversifying your offer into other related areas, or it can also be unrelated. Why is this risky? Look at the orange arrows as it points towards the corners. As you go from left to right, you increase the risk. Because think about it. If you are top left-hand corner, if you just have to make a few tweaks to your marketing, or maybe you have to tweak your advertising in the same market with the same products, it's sort of low risk. Diversification often means buying a whole new company. It means maybe being part of a joint venture or doing a merger with another business. That's risky. That's a lot on the board. I mean, you can totally literally bankrupt an entire organization with such a move, both in terms of your value, your asset values, your capital outlays. Shareholders are never crazy about the idea of a venture or a merger. It's basically very high risk. So why is this matrix important? Because you have to also think about, what do you think is a strategy that these companies, what is the strategy they are adopting? Because that will also inform you why they are making the decisions they make. So let's talk about this a little bit. I'm not going to read through all of this with you, but just like this is something that you do need to know. When you are at home and you're doing this, ask yourself these questions and maybe pick one of these and say, I'm going to look at Zara's growth strategy. And I'm going to ask myself these questions. Are they seeking new customers in existing markets? Are they seeking joint ventures? Are they developing new products? Are they getting more money from existing customers? Are they seeking new customers in new markets or new segments? Or are they seeking to develop new skills and acquire new businesses? And if you can answer these questions, obviously based on research, you can sort of find out what strategy they are adopting. It's important to know what strategy they are adopting, because it will give you information on what strategy our fashion retailers are adopting in competing. Okay, these slides are all very important, but you can go read them. The types of international strategy are important, but it's only important for you to sort of It's not that much assessed explicitly in the assessment, but it's just important for you to know what we mean by them. I think the most important concept here is the concept of, do you decentralize or do you centralize? So it's the same as any other system. You can have a centralized system where you have like your head office and all decisions are made at head office and everybody acts on the whim of head office. And you always hear, but head office says this and head office says that. Or it's decentralized, meaning that each region or each leg of the company in each country, they follow their own strategy. I think a good example of this is someone like Coca-Cola. So we all know that Coca-Cola has sort of a head office, but the fact of the matter is that Coca-Cola on each country basically has its own targets and has its own strategy. For instance, there's not a bottling plant that everybody needs to bottle the same thing to. Every country has its own bottling plant. The only thing that is shared is the formula. And head office makes sure that the formula remains obviously intact and its integrity remains in place and the Coke brand value remains in place. But in terms of operations, in terms of marketing decisions and distribution decisions, we know that locally Coke wants to have a Coke in every fridge. Those kind of decisions can't be made nationally. Does that make sense? It can't be made at a head office somewhere in the United States. Does that make sense to you guys? Am I even sharing the screen with you? Can you share? So you see the screen, types of international strategy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the reason why we're saying this, and let me give you another example. Okay, so the extent of the configuration of assets and capabilities is how they arrange their operations. I've just given you an example, like Coca-Cola has complete operations in every country, or at least in every region. They have complete operations. They're not a truly global company in the extent that they will all bottle in India, for instance, and then distribute it worldwide. Okay, so they're very much, for me, a multinational company. They sense and exploit local opportunities. So Coca-Cola will say, oh, well, a lot of people in Limpopo are drinking Coke because it's hot in Limpopo. We can quickly and easily make a decision. From the factory, a lot of Coke will be sent to our Limpopo points of distribution and sale. You cannot wait for Belgium or the United States to come down with that sort of decision. Okay, that's why there's a limit to the role of overseas operations and the decisions they make, and then the development and diffusion of knowledge. So Coke doesn't care about necessarily what South Africans love. Does that make sense? What they love to drink or what they love to wear or that they like the vuvuzela. You know what I'm saying? Yes, it sort of factors into maybe a PowerPoint presentation at the conference, but it's not that important as it is important for local markets or local knowledge to be retained. Does that make sense? So why is this important? Well, you'll have to answer the question, to what extent is a company like Cotton On infused with South Africa? And to what extent is a company like Louis Vuitton infused with South Africa? As far as I know, Louis Vuitton, and I'm not talking about LVMH. Yeah, I'm only talking about Louis Vuitton, the store. There are only 2 stores in South Africa. And those stores are replenished with stock directly from other regions. They don't have a warehouse in South Africa. They don't have deep operations in South Africa, and they don't have deep marketing in South Africa. A company like Cotton On is perhaps more intertwined with local markets. It does local marketing, it does local market research, it has local distribution hubs, it focuses a lot of its operations locally, merchandise planning is done locally. Does that make sense to you guys? So this whole slide is basically just a slide to determine to what extent. And I want you to focus on these 2 ones on the left, the ones under multinational and the ones under global. Okay, because we are talking about globalization. And if you're talking about a global operation like Zara, we're saying centralized and scaled globally. So it is centralized because remember, Zara literally, or Inditex literally has a center called the hub. That means that it's centrally, decisions get made, intellectual capital gets housed centrally, and then its operations get scaled globally with its supply chains and its distribution points. Implementing a parent company strategies. So again, Zara adopts the strategies of Inditex. Does that make sense? Zara does what Inditex plan is with Zara, and that is to distribute internationally and to use fast fashion. And knowledge is developed and retained at the center. And again, that makes sense. All the designers and all the intellectual capital sits at the hub, and knowledge is developed there. It's not like they get information from South Africa and pump that into the design hub in Spain. Are you guys happy with that? Does that make sense?
I just want to confirm, so would Cotton On then be transnational?
Cotton On is global.
Okay.
Cotton On is global because I think they sufficiently scaled their supply chains from Asian countries in those Asian countries.
Okay.
So again, when we talk about global, I want you to keep one thing in. I want you to when you talk global, I want you to think of a spider web, but also not just a spider web, but also like if I could draw you a picture, it's a bunch of links, but you can take out a link and replace it with another link. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like if all of a sudden you had to take Afghanistan as a flood, there's a flood for some reason. I know it's desert, but just bear with me for a second. All of a sudden there's a massive disaster and Afghanistan gets taken out as a link in the production. You can literally take in another country and put that link in there. You just adjust your pricing a little bit, you adjust your supply chain a little bit, but that link isn't broken because you've established links all over the world. Okay. If it was transnational, it would mean a little bit something different. It would mean that your operations are potentially at risk because look at the transnational description. It's interdependent. So what does that mean? It means Cotton On is dependent on Afghanistan for its supplies. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. They're very interdependent. If they lose that country, so to speak, they lose a bit of their operations. So yes, you will lose a bit of your operations, but you don't lose the key to your strategy. Okay. And that's the thing about these companies that employ these deep supply chains. You can lose a link and you can replace that link. You can go next door to the country next door to find your material. Okay. You can source this thing from Bangladesh. You can source it from, if Afghanistan falls through, you can go to Bangladesh. You can go to Vietnam. You've established links in all those countries.
So what is then like so if we talk then about a multinational, like Truworths, for example, they still source internationally. So can they be like, are they multinational even though they source offshore?
I'm saying to you now that I think TFG is starting to take on the form of a global company.
Okay.
Because it's setting up supply chains in Asia.
Mm.
It's even setting up supply chains in Africa. But those products are being exported maybe for resale in London, UK and Australia. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So it's not like they've got their own. Remember what I said with multinational. Knowledge is developed and retained within each unit. So what that means is that TFG London is TFG London. Okay. That it operates by itself in a cluster. Does that make sense? But we now know that it doesn't work like that. we now know that because the fashion retailers, and especially the international fashion retailers, have developed their supply chains to be dispersed globally. Okay. So does TFG London make decisions by itself, or does TFG London make a decision centrally? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if we were to compare for the assessment, could we then use TFG as an international?
You would need to. There are no correct answers. It's all about your argument.
Okay.
My argument is that I'm not aware that of any fashion retailer that is multinational. As far as I'm concerned, the biggest retailers are all gearing up to become global.
Okay.
Because sorry, yes, go ahead.
Oh, thanks for that clarification, because I was going to have my own argument again with centralized, decentralized. But if you're saying we can argue about that with a reference, then it makes sense to me.
It's all about, at AQF level 8, it's all about your arguments. There's absolutely no reason why you cannot argue that TFG is a multinational, but you would have to argue that TFG London decisions get made by that unit. And I can tell you now that if you read the report, the annual report, you'll know that TFG, their strategy is centrally decided on centrally. And they basically decide on their strategy centrally. And then they merely make sure that all of their units are self-sufficient. So TFG London has to become self-efficient. TFG Australia has to become self-efficient. And it's not just TFG. What branch? Is it Truworths? Is it, remember, in London, they've got different brands. They don't use the same brands as South Africa. So it even doesn't make sense to say that they're multinational, because those brand names are not even familiar to South Africans. They're not even familiar on a sort of a multinational stage. Whereas when we talk about a global company, we can talk about TFG as a global company. Knowledge is developed and retained within each unit for a multinational, but knowledge is developed and retained at the center. And again, if I read the TFG annual report, that sounds to me like a company who is actually developing knowledge at its center unit, which is basically its executive management unit. And it's basically dispersing strategy based on the market opportunities around the world.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I just want to make sure that I'm using the correct terminology in the assessment. So in the assessment, you asked for us to compare a global competitor with a local retailer.
Yes.
So that local retailer can be, it can be a global business model, or it can be an international business model. We just need to be able to argue it in comparison to.
So when I talk about, exactly. So when I talk about global, we're still going to mean that even if they're global, they're still centralized somewhere. Like nobody has to tell you that Inditex is centralized in Spain. TFG is a global company that is centralized in South Africa. And that doesn't even mean, because even if it's listed on the London Stock Exchange, that's not what I mean. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you can consider it local in brackets.
Okay.
But basically, you have to talk. TFG still does the majority of their sales in South Africa, by the way, and sub-Saharan Africa. London and Australia, or UK and Australia, is a very small part of their portfolio, of their sales portfolio. Okay. I think it's barely 20%, if that much. Okay. Pia, you want to add input here? Or are you happy? Okay. So again, don't get too much, but just understand what we mean by how they make decisions and how they create opportunity. Okay, the idea is not necessarily for H&M. They've got stores here, but do they have, what's the level of marketing that they do here? You know what I'm saying?
It's not specified for our region. It's still a global marketing campaign.
Well, here's the thing. If you go and read about, for instance, Zara's design capabilities, they decide what products will be on the shelf in South Africa. So someone sitting in Spain at the hub, sitting right next to the buyers, is deciding what will be on the shelf in South Africa. Does that make sense? It's not a South African sitting here locally within its own within head office making those decisions. Does that make sense? Okay. That means it's a truly global company because it's truly centralized, and then its operations are scaled globally.
Okay. Next
thing you'll want to know is the steep model or the pestle model, and you guys should all be familiar with this. Give me a quick shout out if you're not familiar with this. So the steep model, quickly, it's when we're talking especially about what influences decision-making, strategic decision-making, when we're talking about, especially in the SWOT, you know what the SWOT is? We're talking about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So write this down. Strengths and weaknesses are internal. They are the capabilities that the company have developed. Opportunities and threats are external, and they relate to what the company has to react to. And this slide is what the company has to react to. Chapter 1 is what we've discussed so far, the impact of globalization. Look at the bottom of that model, the impact of globalization. The middle part represents all those factors that influence business strategy. The top part, sequential screening of countries. That's basically to say, what is a country's, remember, the conditions for that country. We spoke about the demand conditions and the factor conditions and the structure and the sort of the environment. Remember Porter's diamond. And then finally, the relationship with competitive advantage. And in that, we're going to be talking about marketing. You can write a whole assessment on this analysis, but I'm not asking this, so be careful. This you'll use for yourself as an analytical tool. Okay, and when I say an analytical tool, okay, let's do an example. If H&M is screening in South Africa for economics, what kind of questions do you think it's asking? Can you see me? Okay. What kind of economic questions do you think H&M is asking?
Perhaps our spending power, our GDP.
There you go. Beautiful. GDP, just elaborate on GDP for the group.
Gross, what? I can't remember. But I do know what it is.
Gross domestic product. So
There
South
we
Africa, exactly. So that's to determine whether we are a wealthy nation, is our gross domestic product. But that's even a bit of a misleading sort of indicator, according to economists, because it doesn't actually reflect true distribution of wealth and spending power. So what we look at is relative spending power per consumer, and we look at the consumer wallet. We look at something like our employment rates. We look at something like economic questions. Okay, and I'm talking about pure economics. I'm not talking about something like, okay, we were talking about the rising black middle class. We were talking about a fairly young demographic. Those are demographic questions, which comes under social. So remember, there's economic, demographic, political, sociological, social, which can actually collapse onto each other, geographical, technological, environmental. Sociological, we can look at like, why is a young market important for fashion? Well, fashion is associated with youth. Young people are very taken. They're very they're aspirant buyers. They like to spend more of their money on more of their wallets on clothes, whereas older generations spend more of their money on things like financial services and saving and education. Young people like spending on clothes, and they're starting in their careers. What about technology? Like, what is the technology available for South Africans? Do they have mobile phones? Do they have smartphones? Do we have tech? Do we have can we stream media? Environment, what's our environment like? Do we have if it's a very cold environment, then obviously you as I don't know, some stupid brand Sunny D selling flops, you're going to struggle in Russia. I know that's a stupid example, but just hear what I'm saying. All of these factors you can look at, but do yourself a favor, don't look at all of them every time. Try and look at the most pertinent ones. Okay, let's do a quick mind experiment. We did this in chapter 1 as well. What is the reason then for companies like H&M and Zara to come to South Africa if our country is economically struggling and politically there's a lot of red tape and the exchange rate is bad because the rand exchange rate is bad, so their pricing is a lot more complex. What then is the reasoning then for choosing South Africa as a market, do you guys think? Mots, I know you want to say something.
I think they analyzed different market groups and they saw opportunities there in different market groups. Yeah.
There we go. I like that answer. So they obviously appreciated that South Africa has a very sort of young population, a very aspirant population. They recognized that up until 2007, there was strong growth, economic growth in the country. And even given the recession, they recognized that our economy is perhaps very robust and resilient in that we can sort of handle it. We can handle the recession and we can actually still manage it and grow from it because we have very good financial markets. We have a good reserve bank who's very disciplined, and we have a very sort of prudent financial services, even though there's a problem of over-indebtedness. But they figured that the risk of debt did not outweigh the opportunity to invest. Do you hear the language I'm using? This is the language that you must start becoming comfortable with. Like things like the risk, again, the risk of investing in terms of indebtedness and in terms of political instability was outweighed by the opportunity that they saw in terms of investing. But then also how much you invest. You maybe create 1 or 2 test stores and you see how that goes and you build it bit by bit. You're not going to rush in and just open 20 stores. That's never going to happen, right? Does that make sense? Okay, fantastic. So you'll be able to do a steep analysis, even though you're not going to do one for this assessment. You should be able to do one in depth. Basically, all that does is you go and read. That's actually all an analysis is. You go and read, and you arrive at a few conclusions. Okay, nothing fancy. You don't have to use graphs or funny stuff like that, even though it does help to paint a pretty picture. But when I'm telling you to do analysis, I'm basically just asking you to go and do research and break down these elements and also highlight the most important elements like we just did just now. You're not going to do that for your assessment, but you'll see it's going to creep in. As you do your assessment, it's going to creep into you like, oh, yeah, but Stefan did mention about like marketing. Oh, we did mention that marketing is one of the steep factors. And obviously, companies look at that when they invest here. So obviously, like Mott says, there are favorable target markets in this country that can be marketed to. Okay, moving straight along. There's a triad. You're going to go watch these videos. I went through socioeconomic, political. It's important to just understand the political environment. 1 and 2. Go and watch that video to help you out, to give you some background information. Culture is straightforward. So culture, You can go read those bullet points. But I think the most important thing that I want you to take away from culture is just the homogenization of a global target market or a global market. That's what we've been hammering on the whole time. Then there's the 3 levels of culture and a comparison between Asia and the West. I think you should just read this and not focus too much on this for your assessment. Just understand that there are different levels of culture, but I wouldn't stress too much about it. The next important slide for you is this slide. Can you guys see what's in front of me here? Do you recognize Maslow's hierarchy? How many of you recognize the much used Maslow's hierarchy? Yes, I've got a yes, yes. Christine, yes. Okay, so Christine, this one is especially for you. Okay, so Maslow's hierarchy dictates that we satisfy our needs in a specific order. We will always satisfy, let me just close this because it's going to drive you insane, your own faces. So this bottom half is Maslow's hierarchy. You're going to satisfy physiological needs, safety and security needs, and social needs, then self-esteem, then self-actualization. Self-actualization is actually becoming your true self and expressing yourself through your consumption. But if you're cold, the first thing you're going to need is a blanket. That's your physiological need. You're not going to worry about a Louis Vuitton blanket at that stage, because humans, we satisfy our needs in forms of a hierarchy. Safety and security is obviously protection and feeling safe and secure. Then social needs is to belong to a social group or to be safe in a social environment, to relate with other people. But also then it rolls into something like self-esteem, where it's about our status in our social hierarchies, prestige. Then that's the next thing that we want to do. We want to feel good about ourselves. And that's especially where things come in like identity and our place and our self-importance and our self-expression. And it ends in self-actualization, being the best us that we can be, achieving all our goals. Is someone trying to say something?
I am now.
No. Okay, so I just hear a bit of breakdown. So basically, you'll go and read up on Maslow's hierarchy, popular. But what I'm introducing here is how this works in international marketing. And I want you to follow the outside prism.
So,
because this
Stefan,
is... Yes, go ahead.
Would you not say that this Maslow's thing is probably one of the biggest hinderisms, if I can call it that, to globalization's positive and negative aspects?
So articulate that for me.
So in other words, if you are cold and need safety, you're going to go for the cheap blanket that's imported. But if you move higher up to self-actualization and you realize, but hi guys, we're supposed to be making these things ourselves to uplift our own people and maybe pay a bit more for it. Does that make sense if I look at it that way?
You've hit the nail on the head, but that's down to specific brand values. That's very much down to specific brand values, because what you've mentioned is one side of it. So exactly what you've said. I'm going to say the first half of that argument is perfect. As you look at physiological needs at the bottom of the pyramid, follow the prism up and see that it corresponds with the mass market. Does that make sense? You read it from the outside in. So what corresponds with safety, security, and physiological needs? The mass market. So they're basically you're saying the mass market needs two things. They need to exactly like you said, they'll go for the cheaper option because they need safety and security and they need physiological needs. They want to buy a t-shirt. They don't care that it's a cheap Chinese import, and they don't care that it's priced ridiculously low, and it's targeted. That brand will target to the mass market because it's a very basic item. But then we move upwards, and we then look at something like social safety and security and social needs. Let's follow the prism. Now we start talking about our customs and our secondary values. And Pierre, what you talked about very much revolves around values. So it depends on the values. What is the values for H&M? So if you're talking about a brand that values sustainability, yes, then we'll talk about a brand that talks about really becoming self-empowered in terms of moving away to a slow fashion kind of mindset. But H&M does not target people necessarily who are self-actualized. H&M targets people who are market segments who have slightly more increased exposure to international things, international brands, and they focus on their customs and their secondary values. And when we talk about secondary values, we talk about identity and self-expression. We're talking about your identity as part of a tribe, and we're talking about your customs. So you want to look cool, or you like this geek trends or this, and you associate more with those values. Okay, does that make sense? So this is what we call those middle tier brands. Okay, they still want to target as large possible of the segments as possible, but they target you based on secondary aspects of your identity. Okay, again, in marketing terms, here we would look at something like your psychographics, your lifestyle, your interests. Does that make sense to you? Then as we move towards the middle, self-actualization, there we start looking at people who are considered the international elite. You see, this is where they meet in the middle. I wish I could demonstrate to you. Can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay. So you follow the line through, and as you move up towards becoming your self-actualized self, your true self, what you watch on TV and who you hang out with doesn't become as important as your personal values. And like Pierre, you said that one of your values is sustainability. Let's say one of your values is sustainability. Okay. Does H&M align with those values?
No.
If it sources cheap products from China or Afghanistan under terrible conditions?
No, it doesn't.
There you go. Fantastic. So this depends on the values of your values and the values of the company. So let's look at the international elite. Louis Vuitton is only in two places, Sandton City and the V&A waterfront, correct?
Yeah.
Who frequents those places? The international elite. It's people talking different languages. They look fabulous. They've got very cosmopolitan mindsets. They've got very progressive mindsets. You know, they speak in German and English accents. You know, they become self-actualized because they're successful. It's not so much as fitting in as expressing their true values and being true to themselves. Now, if your value is more like expressed in terms of Louis Vuitton, you're maybe not so much worried about sustainability as much as exclusivity. Does that make sense? So you're not as worried about, is this made from hemp, from the Himalayas? But you're worried that, was this created by Louis Vuitton as an authentic product? Does this make sense? It's authentic. It's exclusive. It's limited. It represents your values and beliefs as in terms of depending on what your values are. I mean, you can think for yourself. What is the how can I put this? The equivalent of Louis Vuitton in terms of sustainability. For some people, it's something like, oh well, it has to be Patagonia, for instance, right? because for me, they represent the ultimate, the pinnacle in terms of their values and beliefs, you know. And if I'm going to buy, even if I stay in Cape Town and Patagonia sells jackets, and I obviously don't need a windbreaker in Cape Town, but I'm going to buy it because what does it say about me and my values and beliefs? Does that make sense to you? This is very important, guys, because when you look at this model, you have to, this is going to help you compare apples to apples. It does not help you compare Mr. Price to necessarily to Zara. Or if it is comparable, you need to explain to me why it is comparable. Okay, because you know as well as I do that some brands will target the mid-tier markets, some brands will target the upper-tier markets, and some brands will target the lower-tier markets. Does that make sense? Are there any global brands that target lower-tier markets, do you think? Let's hear from you guys.
Lower tier market as in like
Pep, Jet.
So there's plenty of them.
Tell me, who?
Internationally or locally?
Internationally.
I would like to prove and argue that H&M is
lower tier.
Lower tier market, yeah. Even though they position themselves as a middle upper class brand in South Africa, but I think overseas probably they're the same as Mr. Price.
Fantastic.
But
I would love.
Yeah.
I would love to see that argument because now you're thinking critically. I love it. Fantastic. So what a lot of my students have done is obviously they've taken the t-shirt comparison, and that's obviously always a good place to start. Obviously, make sure you try and compare apples to apples because a t-shirt is not a t-shirt, it's not a t-shirt, but more or less, a t-shirt at Mr. Price is $59.99, and a t-shirt at H&M, a white t-shirt at H&M, is 150 Rand. Okay, so it's quite a difference. So obviously, that's a very sort of superficial analysis. So I wouldn't say conduct your whole analysis on that sort of ground, on pricing strategy. But yes, I would like to hear your arguments around that. That's fantastic. What do you guys say? Would you agree with that? Or would you offer your own sort of insight there?
Yeah, because someone can also ask the question that can be answered by H&M. What is their cost price for a t-shirt? Do they buy the same cost price
exactly
as Mr. Price? Or is it a different cost price? Is the quality the same? Is it the same precision and stuff like that?
Yeah, so, I think when you're comparing apples to apples, you need to make sure that, like, yes, a t-shirt at H&M is 150, but what is that t-shirt? And what is the t-shirt at Mr. Price? Because there should be, if just looking at my product knowledge and what I know from the brands, there is t-shirts at H&M at a lower price point, and that's probably more in line with the type of t-shirts that you'll be getting from Mr. Price.
Is it a V-neck? Is it what? Yeah. And was it produced in Afghanistan using?
Yes.
Okay.
And what's the what's the fabric and sort of what's the durability of it? What's the cut? All of that.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. It's like just when you do your analysis, make sure that you really pay attention to those kind of things. And I think this model just really helps illustrate, you know, where companies are targeting when they talk about international marketing. Okay, I've just explained this to you. So I went and typed this out for you guys. Marketing questions asked by brands. You should also ask these questions while you're doing on behalf of brands, while you're doing your analyses. The role of technology, I'm not going to go too deep into that because that's something that you can read in the textbook. Okay, market entry. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to tell you that market entry, the only reason I explain market entry is that just to get to the point of companies can enter markets in different ways, depending on their goals, okay, and depending on how much they want to get involved. If you want to get involved in terms of not very deep, you want to do something like exporting. You want to export your product, to a country and just leave it there in the hands of an agent. And the agent will then make sure that product gets distributed and sold or whatever. Okay. After you've exported it as a business, you don't actually care what happens. And then that's the same with something like licensing under contracts, where yes, you obviously care about your brand and the integrity of your brand and the IP of it. But in terms of the details of it, the operations of it, things get manufactured at maybe head office and you ship it out and the licensing is in place, or there is local production, but it has to obviously subscribe to the certain terms and conditions in the contract. Okay, and then there's a deeper level of going into a country, and that's investment. And that's what we're talking about, starting to buy companies, starting to vertically integrate. You really have to ask, to what extent are these countries or these brands really entering into the country? Because the way they enter into a country also demonstrates their confidence in a country. Okay. Cotton On really invested into South Africa because I think what it is, it started in Australia and it really looked for a similar market. And it really sort of targeted similar markets and similar sort of structured in South Africa. And that's why it was one of its first markets. And that's also why it's really investing in terms of IT and operations and warehousing and all this kind of thing. Okay. You can even buy another company in this country. Like you can buy a bottling plant or whatever and conform it to your standards, whatever you need. And then alliances and partnerships. And I think, Karu, this is again where we get back to something like transnational, where it's more of an alliance and a partnership. Decisions aren't made sort of centrally. It's an alliance. So there's like almost like a give and take, and decisions get made by both entities. Okay, an entity doesn't lose its identity. It just goes into a partnership. It doesn't lose, you know what I'm saying? It's entity. So it's almost like it would be weird, but it would be like H&M and Mr. Price. They get into a partnership. You know what I'm saying? Why would they do that? Only because there's certain things that Mr. Price can do that H&M can't do in the local market. Does that make sense? It has more power to compete if it's in a partnership. You don't really see that in the fashion retail industries. Okay, that's just to explain it. This slide is not important for the assessment. That's just to explain. This slide is very important, guys. Make an NB for this slide, because these are 3 considerations that brands have to consider when they want to engage internationally. So why would you want to source offshore? Why would you want to become a global operation? Okay, your foreign influence is very strong. If you can source from foreign markets, you can lower your labor costs. But remember, depending on where you source from, it's going to influence the perceptions of style, reliability, and quality. So that's going to become a trade-off. International brands have higher pull power than domestic brands. Okay, and this is according to Heinz and Bruce. The idea is that local markets, they like seeing international brands. They like seeing something different. So that's already like an influence. It's especially true about this. International brands come in because they are locally, we have poor technical textile skills and industries. And I think that's one of the main reasons also why we see brands coming in, is because they recognize that our retailers aren't strong in terms of, they don't have a strong industry to back them up. So they also have to rely on sort of global systems, but these companies are better set up to leverage global systems. So that makes sense to you? TFG has had to learn the ropes of global systems, and they're still learning the ropes of global systems to be able to compete. Does that make sense? And that joins with the know-how, point number 2. Global companies have access to global techniques, trading methods, technological competence. Okay, that's how the best ideas get dispersed. And that's because it gets developed, best practice gets developed internationally. And then the opening of stores is important, like how you open your stores and how you operate your retail shops is important in your international marketing strategy. Again, I'll always give the best example. I mean, Cotton On comes in and says, we're going to go long term. We're going to develop, every year we're going to develop X amount of stores. And we're going to develop our warehousing system, and we can develop our merchandise planning in South Africa. And yes, we're going to have strategy coming from Australia, but in South Africa, we're going to have operations. Whereas Louis Vuitton is going, we have 2 stores, that's it. Maybe we even have an agent servicing those stores, doesn't matter. We're not interested in developing any further than that because we really don't see a strong market developing too much in that area. Okay, go read the slide. This will help you. Product choices for new markets. This just explains your product choices. Standardization, adaptation, creation, and mixed. It is what it is. It's quite straightforward. If you standardize a product for different markets, obviously you'll achieve, what did we say earlier, economies of scale. What happens if you have to adapt your product for a market? It becomes more difficult. You have to involve more effort. H&M has done collaboration with a local designer. Okay, what does that mean? Go and find out. What did H&M have to do to collaborate with that local designer? It had to utilize local manufacturers. Was that on a contract basis? H&M didn't necessarily buy a factory, did they? Did they open a manufacturing hub in South Africa? You know what I'm saying? What is the extent of adaptation? And then that's the recap. Okay, so again, the important thing to take away from this slide, I think this slide speaks more to your sort of general knowledge around the questions about why brands compete in these environments on a large, in a sort of a large overhead scale. Does that make sense to you? Like, there's no question that's going to ask you to do a steep analysis, but you need to know why these brands come to South Africa, why they operate in this country, and how and on what terms we have to compete with these brands. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions? You'll have to go and work through that slide. Okay, so let's quickly look at, can I stop sharing with you? You're very quiet, guys. You've got 20 minutes left, so let's push. So you should be, can you see this page? We're back here, right? For this section, you only have to go and watch these 3 videos. Okay, the next one is very easy. It's the 7 P's of marketing. So again, just work through the slide pack. This is very important because literally in your assignment, I literally say use the 7 P's to analyze it. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to open it quickly. Can you see the slide pack open in front of you? Guys?
Yes.
Okay, so even though I say the 7 P's, here's the challenge. You don't have time to compare all these. Okay, so my advice to you is to use product, place, price, and promotion. And maybe process. Okay. Focus on those 5 core aspects. And I'll tell you why. it was recently developed to add physical evidence and people, but physical evidence was mostly added more for the service economy, things like hotels. Okay, a hotel, what is the product that the hotel gives you? Can anybody tell me what is the value that a hotel gives you? Christine, what is the value a hotel gives you? What about rest?
It's what's the right word? It's opulent. So it's
there we go.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's rest, it's relaxation, it's experience. What does that look and feel like? Can you touch opulence? Can you touch rest? Can you touch feeling rested out? So that P was only added for marketers to go, we want to have physical evidence of this. So if we want you to feel welcome in our hotel, we have to put a chocolate mint on your pillow. Okay, that's a dumb example, but we have to go further. We have to personalize the experience. And when you arrive at our hotel, there's a card with your name on it already printed out. Or we've already 3D printed out something for you to say, this is your memento from your stay with us. You know what I'm saying? That's physical evidence in the service economy. That's not going to be so important for this analysis because we have physical evidence. We have products that we can compare. And then same with people. People actually speaks to PR. And that's the PR in marketing, that you can't have an Apple without a Steve Jobs. You can't have a Louis Vuitton without a Lagerfeld or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's the people. It's the people that represent the product. And as much as we're going to do that, we'll touch on that in branding. But for now, I want you to focus on marketing. Okay, does that make sense? And here's another problem. I'm giving you a pointer now. When you write your analysis, this is the style that it's going to suit you best. Have a subheading product and then compare the two directly. Have a subheading place and then compare the two directly. Have a subheading called price and then compare the two, etc., etc. The reason I'm giving you this pointer is what I'm seeing now is that people giving me a long list of one thing and a long list of something else, and they're not comparing it directly. So again, Mots, you and I just spoke about price. Write that for me in a paragraph, comparing the two directly. Don't say, Mr. Price is low price and H&M later, that's also low price, because you're not really saying anything. Okay, you guys, you have to really explicitly compare the two elements, and that's going to be difficult. That's going to be hard. Okay, what about something like place? Place, well, go and look at the slides. What do we say about place? Not just like how they distribute, how many stores they have, do they have online stores, things like that. Karu, I see you want to ask something.
Thanks. Should it be in sort of in a paragraph form, or could we make use of tables?
You make use of tables as far as that you make it understandable for me, and that it's not half-assed or lazy. Because I do see people use tables, and then they basically don't. What you lose in the table is you lose the sentence. So people lose meaning in those tables. So it starts becoming bullet points, and before you know it, they list things instead of discussing things. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So if you're going to use a table,
where you can do it, but do it properly, but don't overdo it and lose them.
Don't overdo it. And if you're going to use a table, you have to focus on 3 or 4 points at the most.
Okay.
So that you don't overpopulate that table and turn it into, because that's what I'm seeing now, is I'm seeing we call it a kitchen sink approach. Where students are saying, no, I'll chuck everything at you, and some of that will stick. Trust me, that's when you actually lose marks. Okay, choose 2 or 3 things and say, okay, price. Okay, what is price? Okay, I read the slides on price. Okay, let's just close here. Let's just do the first one together, right? Okay, I'm gonna share my screen with you guys again. Is Annalise still around? Okay, I'm hoping she's going. Okay, product. Okay. Yay, okay, thank you. You're very quiet. Thank you so much. Okay, so the first one. Okay, is we spoke about differentiation, okay? If you've got a product, you can have two strategies, guys. You can have a price strategy. You can be a cost leader, and that means your product is the basic standard product at the best affordable price, or you can differentiate it based on things like style and fashion forwardness, etc., etc. Okay, there you go. That's a comparison. Ingredient branding, packaging, labeling, which aspects of product differentiation would be most valuable in setting X, and X is your brand X, apart from the competitors? What about H&M's product sets it apart? Okay, then we have the customer value hierarchy. You'll have to work through that, and basically you start with your core benefit, a jacket, and you work all the way out to what the jacket represents. And represents a culmination of all the possible things that can be within a jacket, all the possible augmentations that can be made. Basically, all this slide is basically telling you is that, let's face it, H&M has a jacket and Mr. Price has a jacket. But let's face it, you don't buy it because it's a jacket. You buy it for its intrinsic value, and that's the customer value that gets delivered. What do you expect from that jacket? It's a leather jacket. Do you expect it to be leather, or do you expect it to be pleather? What do you expect from it? Do you expect it to have a certain design? Do you expect it to have a certain cut? Do you expect a certain quality? Do you want that little thing in the middle, that little brand that says, oh, this is a Zara jacket? Or even better, this is a, someone's, give me a very popular, the bestest leather jacket ever. Anyone? Pierre, what's the best leather jacket you own?
Definitely not a name brand.
There you go. Exactly. So Pierre has obviously very fine specific set of values that he invests, but that's fantastic. That's fine. But you get what I'm saying, guys. Okay. Here's a nice sort of list about how you can sort of differentiate. So I want you to go, and obviously this is bullet point. You have to go and just think through them for yourself. Okay. You know what performance, conformance, durability, repairability, and style is. I've highlighted some of the most pertinent ones for fashion products. Form is important, because if something is the form of a product, obviously can put you off. How it performs in terms of if it's a jacket, does it actually just stand together as a jacket? Conformance, quality, does it conform to expectations? Is it durable? Is it stylish? And to what extent can you customize it? And then design, etc., etc. Okay. Then you go and compare price. You go and compare, there's quite a lot about pricing, and I expect you to go and, I really can't go through all of this with you guys. If you want, I can, when I make notes, I'll put this all in notes for you. But this slide is very important, guys, because what's at the bottom here? It's the strategies. Cost leadership, differentiation, and focus. We call these the grand strategies, and most companies have strategies that can be classified under these grand strategies. Okay, and there's a big argument about which is which. Okay, Mots, let's go back to H&M. Do you think H&M uses a cost leadership strategy or a differentiation strategy? So let's look at it. What does cost say? It's low cost. It requires, there are those words, economies of scale, proprietary technology, access to raw materials, and exploits all sources of cost advantage. So what is cost advantage? Cost advantage means that lowest labor. You go straight to China. You have to exploit that. You have to exploit that advantage. You can't afford to have super advertising. You have promotions in newspapers. You can't afford to invest billions in sustainability. So you don't worry about things like legal lawyers and sustainability and etc. and regulations, etc., etc. Because that makes sense. You're a cost leader. You're a Walmart. You only care about everyday low prices. Which fashion retailer does that? Okay, think about that. Who?
Cotton on.
You think
Cotton
so?
price, H&M. Yeah, but I have to clarify that with the research.
You
But
have
my
to
own
clarify
view,
that.
yeah.
Because if H&M does that, why does H&M even collaborate with designers at all? It's not interested in being a cost leader if it's working with designers. You know what I'm saying? Because that doesn't contribute to its strategy. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Think about the word differentiate. My product has to be different. Okay. That's why I need things like design innovation and research and development. Design innovation. That's why I need to invest more in designers. If think about, let's do the shorthand. If cost is my strategy, I need to invest in cost. If differentiation is my strategy, I need to invest in making my product different. Does that make sense? So I have to say to you, that's going to be a very hard argument to prove, because I think I know where you're coming from. You're looking at high tier, middle tier, and low tier. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Those brands that you're talking about, they are targeting a broad market, but that doesn't mean that they're low tier. Remember, they could still be targeting the mass market, which is the middle market, if you know what I'm saying. For me, I would think Cotton On still assumes a product differentiation, a differentiation strategy, because they still invest enough in setting apart different design styles. They still invest in advertising. They still invest a lot in promotions and advertising. So your argument will have to be really good for me to prove that they're for following a cost leadership strategy. For me, cost leadership strategy will always be something like a PEP. Always, always, always. Literally on there. And guys, there's still a fashion retailer. I know we're playing with the word fashion. And when we get to branding and luxury branding, then we'll unpack. We'll unpack high taste, low taste, high market, low market. Trust me. But for now, Pepcore is part of it. But we don't want to make it part of it, because it almost falls outside of fashion, where it becomes more like a commodity. You know what I'm saying? Because they don't differentiate. You walk into that store, you want a pair of shoes because you want a pair of shoes to put on your feet. End of story. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. It makes sense to walk into that store because you want to put a pair of shoes on your feet. And even if it's a pair of... It's not going to last. No, you're right. It's not going to last because durability is not part of its brand story.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That's a very good point.
But you're right in saying that it's still part of the fashion industry, because the people that shop at PPS, there is a sense of, I need a pair of shoes on my feet, but there's still that concern, like, why don't they just then offer one pair of shoes, like one style? So they're still in the fashion business because there's still people that want, for that level of price, to look a little bit fashionable.
Correct. So they're still in assortment. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And
There's
those,
still yeah.
and those consumers, they follow trends as well. They follow
Well, there you go.
influencers.
There you go. There you go. And for all you know, all Pep needs is just a good in-house buyer. And before you know it, you're getting some very, very snazzy shoes at the local Pep, dude. I mean, let's think about it.
Well, I have to say, with Pep, they're well known for their baby clothes. Because baby clothes doesn't last. It doesn't need to last long, and it's cotton. So I
It's
know that
100% organic cotton.
Yes. Well, I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, you were saying, Christine?
No, I'm just saying, I know that that's what they're well known for, but also a baby only needs it for 3 months, 6 months, and then for the shoes and bags, I mean, it's just a different market.
There you go. Fantastic.
I think it comes in with the disposability of it, because like you're saying, babies don't wear it for long. But even if you look at the school stuff, we all know how quickly kids grow and they lose their shoes and their school stuff. So there's a aspect of that.
So thank you very much, guys. So exactly, you've highlighted already a few key features of decision making, which is performance, quality, and durability. Maybe even features, if you want to go that far. Look how that interlinks with something like price and price strategy. And I think the mistake that people make is they see each one of these in isolation. It's not, guys. A marketing strategy is a combination of all these things. So if you can even write a whole paragraph or a long paragraph combining some of these factors for one brand, and then say, when compared with this, and then write a whole another long integrated paragraph. I gave you subheadings as an idea, but that's, it's still very siloed. Does that make sense? You can have a very well-written organic piece report that really goes deep into how each one differs and how, how they are similarities. But remember, when you're writing, nobody wants to hear about boring similarities. Okay. When you do your analysis, try and pounce on ideas that are interesting because they are different. Does that make sense? It's boring to say H&M is low-tier cost leadership and Mr. Price is also low-tier cost leadership. Okay, that's not an interesting point for your reader. When you talk about these things, try and really highlight the interesting elements of it. Okay, so we're running out of time. You're going to place is your marketing channels. Omni-channel, you know what omni-channel is. Here is the one thing I want to highlight with you guys, and that's suppliers and supply chain. Do yourself a favor. The first thing you do for your two companies is go and read their annual reports and go and figure out what their marketing channels are. And that's one of the key things they'll talk about. Their stores, their omni-channel, which is their e-commerce, and their suppliers. They'll always talk about this, guys. You will see this in each integrated report. You don't have to use one from 2019 or one from 2018. You can use one from 2017. However, if you use like an H&M report from 2017, you have to use the Mr. Price report from 2017. Okay. You have to compare apples to apples. You cannot compare apples to oranges. Then you have a nice little sort of picture of the global supply chain. Promotion is quite easy because that's what we all understand as promotion. Again, people and processes, I wouldn't focus on that too much. Processes I would still focus on because, as you can imagine, Louis Vuitton, their process is on handcrafting one piece of luggage for Kanye West. Guys, what process do they use for that? As opposed to H&M ordering t-shirts from Bangladesh. You know what I'm saying? They're focusing different strengths in different areas, and they're focusing their strengths in the areas where they'll be able to deliver value. So if Zara's thing is fast fashion, their processes are really good, well developed in terms of their operations and their supply chain management. But Louis Vuitton's thing is about craftsmanship. So their processes are about retaining craftsmanship. Okay. You don't expect them to be like clocking in and working so much on this and that. So go and watch that video that I've linked there, just to get an idea of what I mean by processes. Okay, then I'm finishing up. But at the end of the day, STP, maybe we can discuss that maybe in my notes. I'll make a few notes on that. But maybe in your mind's eye, you're going to have to come up with something like this. You want to compare something on terms of the quantum of quality and the quantum of price. So even though Mott's puts H&M there at the very bottom, this author puts H&M there in the middle. Middle quality, middling quality at middling price. Whereas your Marks and Spencer, somewhat high quality, but very high price. So a marketer would even say that they're overpriced for their quality. Zara's at the far end of the spectrum, so you would say that, oh, well, they're actually quite reasonable in terms of their price for the quality that you get. And then right here at the bottom left-hand corner, you have Primark. Very low quality for very low price. Would you agree with that statement? Maybe Primark is the Walmart of clothes. Would that be a fair statement?
Well, I know that Macy's, I mean, in London is like Mr. Price over here.
Macy's?
We don't get it here, though.
Isn't Macy's supposed to be a premium brand?
I don't know.
Macy's is premium, and they're going through a hard time because no one's buying luxury at the moment. They stock all the designers.
Okay, so I'm wrong.
They closed about
exactly.
2,000 stores at the start of the year.
So, guys, here's my advice. This is my advice to you. If you want to take a few takeaways from this workshop. Okay, first things first. We've just worked through the first 3 slide packs, and as you can see, it's not rocket science. Okay, it's all very sort of common sense, but it's about how you can create arguments. There is some reading. You need to read chapter 1, 4, 6, and 7 over the next few weeks. You need to also, obviously there's no homework, but you have to go and read. Wherever there's extra reading, you have to do that. Let's quickly go back to the page. There's an article here. There's an academic journal entry. And then here's your, let's quickly go to finish up and go back to the event brief. Part C. So it's a class activity, but for you, obviously, it's an individual activity. There will be a workshop hosted based around the PFF SWOT models below. How many of you are familiar with the PFF SWOT models? So if you've got a rudimentary, okay, that's why I'm doing it with all of you guys. SWOT is basically every piece of business analysis has a SWOT in it, and every competitive analysis has Porter's 5 forces in it. Your job is to go and do that. So it's due for the week of 5th of May. And you'll go down here and click here. And you'll click on SWOT activity for marks. And then you'll follow the steps. You'll read the 2 articles below. And you'll use these models to conduct a competitive industry analysis on the South African fashion retailer industry, 500 words. So it's not a lot. It seems like a lot of homework, 1,000 words. But once you start writing, you'll see it's not a lot. So you'll almost have to make notes here. And then you'll have to conduct a SWOT analysis with TFG as your subject. So compile notes for workshop to be held on this date. I need you guys to decide to suggest to me when you would like to have a workshop on this, because we are adults. I'm not going to tell you what you need to do. You need to tell me what you need to do. Okay. I'm thinking if this is due in May, maybe we have this maybe in 2 weeks' time. What do you guys think?
I think that's great. The week of the 27th.
What did I say in my? Did I say anything? Just hang on. Let's quickly. I want to check something. Hang on 1 second. I said the due date is Tuesday, the 5th of May. So that's actually the due date of the 5th of May. So anytime before that, guys, maybe drop me a Karu. Maybe you guys must just drop me a mail, or do you want to decide now via? Because I want you to check your schedules, but I don't want to. It's like a consultation. Okay. We can do it on a one-on-one consultation basis, or we can do it as a group workshop. What do you prefer?
Group.
Group, because then you can also learn from each other.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. But I want you to go and. Yes, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, if you look at the calendar, the 5th of May, maybe the 28th is exactly a week before. It gives us.
Fantastic. So let's make it a week before, because it's not. It's 1,000 words. It's 1,000 words, guys. But it's also, I want to do it so that you can see that you're integrating these ideas. You know what I'm saying, into your assignment. So that's why it's also important for you to get it done sooner rather than later. But also I want you to go and read up on these models and go and do the activity, read the annual report. And you don't have to prepare anything for the workshop, but at least you would have read the articles and you would have read the TFG annual report and you would have thought about it. Okay. Because it is going to be for marks, and I also need to keep you active in this process. Okay, so what's nice about the article, so let's just, sorry, I'm sharing this again with you. Okay, do you see the homepage again? Do you see the class page? What do you see in front of you?
Class page.
Class page, fantastic. So let's go back down here to the activity. So it tells you about the model. It doesn't tell you about how to apply the model, but it tells you about the model, and you have to think about it. Does that make sense? So let's do one, for example, the bargaining power of suppliers. When we talk about Porter's 5 forces, if you go and do research, it almost looks like a diagram where, what is a force? A force is something that it pushes against each other. Does that make sense? I'm almost done, you guys. I just need to explain the activity with you. If there are more suppliers servicing you as a company, you have leverage, because you can, if one supplier can't deliver, you can cancel that supplier and go to the next best supplier. Does that make sense? That's a force in the industry because you have leverage. Okay, and that's an influence. However, if you only have one supplier that supplies you your product, they've got power, because all of a sudden they can dictate terms and they can dictate price, and that matters in an industry, because now we're saying, well, we're in the fashion industry and all the suppliers are in Asia and they're popping up like mushrooms, and if your factory in Bangladesh can't offer you your product or your item at a price that is suitable for your strategy, you can just go to the next supplier. But who's got access to global suppliers? Global companies. Am I right? Someone like a global company has more leverage and has more power than a local, like a South African retailer who has not really developed those supply chains. Does that make sense to you guys? And that's the kind of thinking that you have to assume for this kind of exercise. Look here again. What are we seeing there? Strategies for success, cost leadership, differentiation, focus. So we've done this. There is the schema with some notes, and then I've also included a blank one, so you can do your own notes. Okay. So just if you have any problems, drop me a line so we can talk through it one-on-one because we've run out of time. And then there is your SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Use these little notes on the side to try and figure out what we mean by each, but always remember, strengths and weaknesses of a company, of TFG, is something that they can develop on the inside. Opportunities and threats come from the outside. You don't have control over opportunities and threats. You can only exploit them, react to them, and deal with them. Does that make sense? Okay. We've run out of time, but I think I've got through the major parts. One last thing. At the bottom here, we're going to have another workshop, guys, for global corporate identity and brand. And then please go and look at this academic writing and research resources over here. Okay. You are doing a comparison contrast essay. So do yourself a favor and go watch this video and get some pointers on how to do that well. Okay. Don't assume that this is a fairly straightforward thing, because I'm very critical and I'm going to look for how you engaged critically. For me, it's more important that you provide a few good ideas with good evidence than just regurgitate a bunch of information that is quite useless. Does that make sense? Okay, fantastic. So I think what you'll see from this subject is it's not like maybe Chris's subject where it's a lot more about theories and integrating theories. It's much more about models and the predictability of models using evidence in the world that we know. Okay, so you're going to have to adopt two different mindsets for these two different subjects. For my subject, you can have a very strong argument, and as long as you have evidence to back it up, you can get 10 out of 10. Okay. If you regurgitate information to me, it's not interesting. You need to demonstrate that you've read wider in terms of you've read about these companies and you've read about these things and you've demonstrated an interest in these sorts of fields. I'm there available for you guys. I wouldn't say 24/7, but if you say you want to talk to me for 15 minutes on Teams about this aspect, book me. I will make it a point to talk to you. Okay. I want you to have 10% anxiety, as I said earlier. 10% anxiety is just enough to get through, but you still need to have a little bit of anxiety because it's quite rough what you guys are doing. But I'm there for you guys. Okay. I'm going to upload this recording for you with the YouTube link, and I'm going to link it inside your class, and I'm going to go and make like notes for you guys based on each slide pack and just say to you, remember this. Okay, you are in good hands. What I'll also do is, if you want, I can give you an example of a good essay, but again, guys, that is just one approach. I do not want a single dimension approach. You are not all parroting the same thing. You have your own unique academic voice, and I want it to come through. Okay. So yes, I can share an example with you of what I consider is a good essay, but please do not copy it in terms of stylistically and ideas. Okay. Promise me?
Promise.
Okay. We're going to have to organize another workshop to get through the last three stuff, but I think that'll be like an hour workshop because I think we did quite a lot tonight. How does that sound? So cool. I think the 28th of April is too late. So I think in a week's time, we're going to have another workshop for an hour, and then we're done. Then after that, we can go on a consultation basis. How does that sound?
Should we book next week Thursday, Stefan?
I think we should book it.
Okay, from 5 or from 6?
I think we should book it from 5 to 6 so we can get it done and dusted. So you can spend then more time with your family than after that. What do you think?
That's fine.
Happy with it.
So next Thursday, 5 to 6, we're going to cover the last slide pack. We're going to cover all your, okay, so let's be fair. Let's make it an hour and a half, guys. I know it's rough, but let's make an hour and a half. Half an hour for questions, Q&A, and an hour to cover the last bit of work.
Cool.
Because here's what I want to do. I also want to upload the lesson on supply chain management. Whereas the thing about that, that's also recording. So I recorded one half of that lesson. So I can even upload the recording. But even what I have on there, I also have one narrated slide. So you can go and watch that beforehand. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't have to be a 3-hour workshop. Okay. You can just make notes and we can just have a quick discussion. How does that sound? Fantastic. What do you guys think? It's easy, right? It's not that hectic. Do you feel that you have the capabilities to deal with it?
I don't think that it's necessarily difficult. I just think it's a lot.
Yeah,
It's a
there's
lot.
a
Yeah.
lot to cover. So that's the not easy part. There's a lot that
Yes.
we have to learn in a short period of time.
Yeah,
You have to a lot, yes.
I have no background in marketing or economics, so I'm definitely swimming.
Okay, I think then you will feel yourself and then book a consultation with me. Okay, I know you're pushed for time, but I think you should first read, go and do a lot of reading so that you can stimulate yourself. Because as much as you don't have experience, you have a very healthy mind. And then let's meet and have a consultation. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Good luck. You're in good
Thanks,
hands.
Stefan.
And keep watching the page because there'll be updates on your class very regularly. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Good luck.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
guys.
Bye,
Thanks.
Have a good
everyone.
one.
Bye.
Stefan.